Good morning. This week is 1 Kings 5 through 9. Preparations for the building of the temple. When Hiram, king of Tyre, heard of Solomon had been appointed king to succeed his father David, he sent his envoys to Solomon because he had always been on friendly terms with David. Solomon sent back this message to Hiram. You know that because of the wars waged against my father David from all sides, he could not build a temple for the name of the Lord his God until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side, and there is no adversary or disaster. I intend, therefore, to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord told my father David when he said, Your son, whom I will put on the throne in your place, will build a temple in my name. So he gave orders that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me. My men will work with yours, and I will pay for your men whatever wages you set. You know that we have no one so skilled in felling timber as the Syrians. Okay. Okay. This week reading is week 23, 1 King no, 24, 10 to 13. Okay, I'm going to continue with 5 to 9. Solomon's other activities. At the end of 20 years during which Solomon built these two buildings, the temple of the Lord God and the royal palace, King Solomon gave 20 towns to Galilee, gave 20 towns in Galilee to Hiram, king of Tyre, because Hiram had supplied him with all of the cedar and junipers and gold that he wanted. But when Hiram went from Tyre to see the towns that Solomon had given him, he was not pleased with him. What kind of towns are these you have given me, my brother? He asked, and he called them the land of Kabul, a name they have to this day. Now Hiram had sent to the king 120 talents of gold. Here is the account of the forced labor King Solomon conscripted to build the Lord's temple, his own palace, the terraces, the walls of Jerusalem and Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had attacked and captured Gezer, and and he set on and he set it on fire. He killed its Canaanites inhabitants, and then gave it as a wedding gift to his daughter, Solomon's wife. And Solomon rebuilt Gezer. He built up a lower Beth Horon, Behalath, and Tedemor in the desert within his land, as well as all of the stores, cities, and towns for his chariots and for his horses. Jerusalem in Lebanon and throughout all of the territory that he ruled. There were still people left from the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites. These people were not Israelites. Solomon conscripted the descendants of these peoples remaining in the land whom the Israelites could not exterminate to serve as slave labor as it is to this day. But Solomon did not make slaves of any of the Israelites. They were his fighting men and his government officials, his officers, his captains, and the commanders of his chariots and charioteers. They were also the chief officials in charge of Solomon's projects. 550 officials supervised those who did the work. After the Pharaoh's daughter had come up from the city of David to the palace Solomon had built for her, he constructed the terraces. 3 times a year Solomon sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings on the altar he had built for the Lord, burning incense before the Lord along with them, and so fulfilled the temple's obligations. King Solomon also built ships at Ezon and Geber, which is near Elath and Edom on the shore of the Red Sea, and Hiram sent his men, sailors who knew the sea, to serve in the fleet with Solomon's men. They sailed to Ophir and brought back 420 talents of gold, which they delivered to King Solomon. The Queen of Sheba visits Solomon. When the Queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon and his relationships with the Lord, she came to test Solomon with hard questions. Arriving at Jerusalem with a great caravan with camels carrying spices and large quantities of gold and precious stones, she came to Solomon to talk with him about all that she had on her mind. Solomon answered all of her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba saw all of the wisdom of Solomon in the palace he had built, and the food on his table, and the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. She said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country." Yeah. We have to seal it. Okay. Excuse me. Three times a year, Solomon sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings on the altar he built before the Lord, burning incense before the Lord along with them, and so fulfilling the temple obligations. King Solomon also built ships at Ezon and Geber, which were near Elath in Edom on the shore of the Red Sea. And Hiram sent his men, sailors who knew the sea, to serve the fleet with Solomon's men. They sailed to Ophir and brought back 420 talents of gold, which they delivered to King Solomon. The Queen of Queen of Sheba visits Solomon. When the Queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon and his relationship with the Lord, she came to test Solomon with hard questions. Arriving at Jerusalem with a very great caravan of camels carrying spices and large quantities of gold and precious stones, she came to Solomon and talked with him about all that she had on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. When the queen saw all of the wisdom of Solomon and the palace that he had built, and the food on his table, and the seating of his officials, and attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. She said to the king, "The report I heard in my own company about your achievements and your wisdom is true, but I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half of what was told to me in wisdom and wealth. You have so far exceeded the report I have heard. How happy your people must be. How happy your officials who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, large quantities of spices and precious stones. Never again were so many spices brought in as those the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Hiram's ships brought gold from Ophir, and from there they brought great cargoes of almug wood and precious stones. The king made the almug wood to make supports for the temple, and the Lord for the royal palace, and to make harps and lyres for the musicians. So much almug wood had never before been imported and seen to this day. King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for, and besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty. Then she left and returned with her retinue to her own country. Solomon's splendor. When the weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents, not including the revenues from merchants and traders and from all of the Arabian kings and governors of the territory, King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. He also made 300 small shields of hammered gold, with 3 minas of gold for each shield. The king put them in the palace of the forest of Lebanon. And then the king made a great throne covered with ivory and overlaid with fine gold. The throne had 6 steps to it, and its back had a rounded top. On both sides of the seat were armrests with a lion sitting beside each of them. 12 lions stood on the 6 steps, one on each end of each step. Nothing like it had ever been made for any kingdom. All King Solomon's goblets were of gold, and all of the household articles in the palace in the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. Nothing was made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. The king had a fleet of trading ships at sea, along with the ships of Hiram. Once every 3 years it returned, carrying gold, silver, and ivory, and apes and baboons. The King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all of the other kings on earth. The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom of God had put on his heart. Year after year, everyone who came brought a gift, articles of gold and silver, robes, weapons, spices, horses, mules. Solomon accumulated chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horses, which he kept in the chariot city, and also with him in Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and cedar as plentiful as sycamore fig trees in the foothills. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and from Kue. Merchants purchased them from Kue at the current price. They imported a chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. And they also exported to all of the kings of the Hittites and to the Amorites. Solomon's wives. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides the Pharaoh's daughter: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonites, Hittites. They were from nations from which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives had led him astray. And as Solomon grew old, his wife turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, and the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonites, and Mohelek, the detested god of the Amorites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely as David his father had done. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a temple on a high place for Cheremosh, the detested god of Moab, and for Moloch, the detested god of the Amorites. He did the same for all his foreign wives who were burning incense and offered sacrifices to their own gods. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he didn't Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this is not your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son, yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but will give him one tribe for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen." Solomon's adversaries. Then the Lord raised up against Solomon an adversary, Hadad the Edomite, from the royal line of Edom. Earlier, when David was fighting with Edom, Joab, the commander of the army who had gone up to bury the dead, had struck down all the men of Edom. Joab and all the Israelites stayed there for 6 months until they had destroyed all of the men in Edom. But Hadad, still only a boy, fled to Egypt with some Edomite officials who had served his father. They set out from Midian and went to Paran, and then taking people from Paran with them, they went to Egypt, to the Pharaoh king of Egypt, who gave Hadad a house and land and provided him with food. The Pharaoh was so pleased with Hadad that he gave him a sister of his own for his own wife, Queen Tahpenes, in marriage. The sister of Tahpenes bore him a son named Genubath, whom Tahpenes brought up in the royal palace. There Genubath lived with Pharaoh's own children. While he was in Egypt, Hadad heard that David rested with his ancestors, and that Joab, the commander of the army, was also dead. Then Hadad said to the Pharaoh, "Let me go, and that I may return to my own country." "What have you lacked here that you want to go back to your own country?" the Pharaoh asked. "Nothing," Hadad replied, but do let me go. And God raised up against Solomon another adversary, Rezon, son of Eladadah, who had fled from his master, Hadadezer, king of Zob. When David destroyed Zob's army, Rezon gathered a band of men around him and became their leader, and they went to Damascus, where they settled and took control. Rezon was Israel's adversary for as long as Solomon lived, adding to the trouble caused by Hadad. So Rezon ruled in Aram and was hostile towards Israel. Jeroboam rebels against Solomon. Also, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, rebelled against the king. He was one of Solomon's officials, an Ephraimite from Zeredah, and his mother was the widow named Zeruah. Here is the account of how he rebelled against the king. Solomon had built the terraces, and he filled in the gap in the wall of the city of David his father. Now Jeroboam was a man of standing, and when Solomon saw how well the young man did his work, he put him in charge of the whole labor force of the tribes of Joseph. About the time Jeroboam was out of Jerusalem, and Ejah, the prophet of Shiloh met him on the way wearing a new cloak. The two of them were alone out in the country, and Ahijah took hold of the new cloak he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord God of Israel says. See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hands and give you 10 tribes. But for the sake of my servant David and the city of Jerusalem, which I have chosen of all of the tribes of Israel, he will have one tribe. I will do this because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Syrians, and Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Moloch, the god of the Amorites, and have not walked in obedience to me, nor done what is right in my eyes, nor kept my decrees and laws, as David, Solomon's father, did. But I will not take the whole kingdom out of Solomon's hand. I have made him a ruler all the days of his life for the sake of David, my servant, whom I chose, and whom obeyed my commands and decrees. I will take the kingdom from his son's hand and give you 10 tribes. I will give you one tribe so that his son, so that David, my servant, may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I chose to put my name. However, as for you, I will take you and will rule over you, that your heart that you will be the king over Israel, if you do whatever I command you and walk in obedience with me. And do not do what's right in my eyes by obeying my decrees and commands as David my servant did. I will be to you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the ones I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. I will humble David's descendants because of this, but not forever." Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam fled to Egypt, to Shishak, the king, and stayed there until Solomon's death. Solomon's death. As for the other servants of Solomon's reign, all he did and the wisdom he displayed, are they not written in the book of the annals of Solomon? Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all of Israel for 40 years. Then he rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David his father. And Rehoboam, his son, succeeded him as king. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all of Israel had gone there to make him king. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard of this, he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt, so they sent Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, and is now lightened the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us. We will serve you." Rehoboam answered, "Go away for 3 days and then come back to me." So the people went away. And then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his. "How would you advise me to answer these people?" he said. They replied, "If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants." But Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. He asked them, "What is your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, 'Lighten the yoke your father put on us'?" The young men who had grown up with him replied, "These people have said to you, 'Your father put a heavy yoke, make the yoke lighter.' Now tell them, 'My little finger is thicker than your father's wrist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, and I will scourge you with scorpions." 3 days after Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam, as the king had said, "Come back to me in 3 days." The king answered the people harshly, rejecting the advice given to him by the elders. He followed the advice of the young men and said, "My father made your yoke heavy, and I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions." So the king did not listen to the people, for this turn of events was from the Lord to fulfill the word the Lord had spoken to Jeroboam, son of Nebat, through Ahijah the Shilonite. When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look down after your own house, David." So the Israelites went home. But as for the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them. King Rehoboam set out Adoniram, who was in charge of forced labor, but all Israel stoned him to death. And then King Rehoboam, however, managed to get into his chariot and escape to Jerusalem. So Israel had been in rebellion against the house of David, and is to this day. When all the Israelites heard that Jeroboam had returned, they sent and called him to the assembly and made him king over all Israel. Only the tribe of Judah remained loyal to the house of David. When Rehoboam arrived in Jerusalem, he mustered all of Judea and the tribe of Benjamin, and 180,000 able young men to go to war against Israel and to regain the kingdom for Rehoboam, son of Solomon. But the word of God came to Shemaiah, the man of God, saying to Rehoboam, son of Simon, king of Judah, to all of Judah and Benjamin, and to the rest of the people, "This is what the Lord says: Do not go up to fight against your brothers and the Israelites. Go home, every one of you, for this is my doing." So they obeyed the word of the Lord and went home again, as the Lord had commanded. The golden calves at Bethel and Dan. When Jeroboam fortified Shechem, the hill country of Ephraim, and lived there, from there he went out and built up Peniel. And Jeroboam thought to himself, "The kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David if these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. They will again give their allegiance to the Lord. Rehoboam, king of Judah, they will kill me and return to King Rehoboam." After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, "Is it too much for you to go up to Jerusalem? Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. One he set up in Bethel, and the other in Dan, and this because a sin that the people came to worship the one at Bethel and went as far as Dan to worship the other." Jeroboam built shrines on the high places and appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites. He instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, on the festival held in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. This he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves he had made. And at Bethel he also installed priests at the high places and made. And on the 15th day of the 8th month of his own choosing, he offered sacrifices on the altar, and he built at Bethel. So he instituted the festival for the Israelites and went up to the altar to make offerings. More appointed priests for the high places from all sorts of people. Anyone who wanted to become a priest, he consecrated for high places. This was the sin of the house of Jeroboam that led to its downfall and to its destruction from the face of the earth. This is the word of the Lord God.